Adam is the founder of BuddingTech, a company here in Australia looking at technological solutions in the cannabis market. Please make him welcome.
Mind if I can use the microphone? Excellent. Yep. Thank you so much. Yeah. There we go. Yep. Great. Hi guys. So. As was mentioned, I started a company called BuddingTech, and our objective in 2016 was to encourage the development of the ancillary industries around the medical cannabis markets and to look at how the federal legislation had developed to kind of suit a very pharmaceutical style industry and kind of understanding how entrepreneurs could take advantage of that. But before I get further into that, I'll kind of take a look at what's going on around the world in the medical cannabis market. So. The country that we often most refer to, Israel, has recently increased its patient population to 27,000. In 2012, there was only 10,000 patients, so it's experienced an exponential increase in growth of patient population. And additionally to that, they've also recently created legislation to open up the export market. So they've started to explore the science. In fact, not even started, they're well into the process of exploring the science, and now they're creating federal legislation to allow for exportation to a global market. In Canada, the patient population this year increased by 227%. In America, there are more than 27 states that have a medical cannabis program in place, but as Troy just mentioned, unfortunately, because there's a federal issue with cannabis use, it's in a state of flux, so nobody really understands how the industry is going to grow there. In Germany, most recently, the country allowed for medical use for different patient groups, specifically with multiple sclerosis, chemo-induced nausea, and that's quite a success because Germany is going to be, in my view, quite a powerful country in the coming years because they've got a very, unique way of dealing with the legalization of cannabis, but I don't have enough time to kind of get into that. Another few interesting countries that have recently come out of the woodworks are South Africa. They've just recently passed legislation to allow for cannabis cultivation for medical use. And most notable is Argentina, which last month allowed for, as well, legislation to allow for cannabis use. But the most interesting thing about Argentina is they're developing a program next month which will allow patients to access medication for free. So they've just started working on this initiative. So kind of looking at Australia and where we're at. So last year, Australia, on the 24th of February, allowed for the domestic cultivation and manufacturing of cannabis. There was changes made to the Drugs and Narcotics Act. And in October, they rescheduled cannabis from Schedule 9, meaning that it is prohibited, to Schedule 8, meaning it is a controlled substance that can be prescribed by a specific authorized prescriber. This is really interesting because countries like the ones that I just described have taken a patient access first, legislation second model, whereas Australia has gone the complete opposite, which was something that you were saying, which is, Australia takes very interesting approaches to doing things, and if it's not their idea, they kind of try and make it in a way that it is, but they've gone down the path of developing legislation so that they can very much regulate the market. And in regards to opportunities, what it creates is a unique ability for Australia to eventually grow products for a global market. We did a study with the University of Sydney and a company called MGC Pharma. They're a ASX-listed company, and this was done in 2016. And one of the demographics that we created showed that if we were to look at three patient groups, HIV, epilepsy, and Parkinson's disease, there's a population of around 30,000 patients. And what we did was then compared the average cannabis consumption in Israel, Canada, and the Netherlands for those specific patient groups. We estimated a rough amount of 8 to 12 tons per year of cannabis, which would equal, from a global market, $150 to $200 million per year. If you look at the opium market in Australia, which is worth $300 million per year annually, you can see how cannabis has the potential to very much disrupt the industry. So there's a lot of resistance, but nonetheless, we do have an industry that's starting to grow, but very slowly. And some of the most, critical barriers to access right now is the fact that we don't have registered products available in Australia. But the government does have pathways to access unregistered products, which is the Authorised Prescriber Scheme and the Special Access Schemes. Now, there were two portals for the Special Access Scheme, Portal A and Portal B. Portal A was a simple notification to the government to say we're going to be prescribing an unregistered product to a patient, and this was it. Unfortunately, Susan Ley, the previous health minister, the day that cannabis was rescheduled, made a discretionary change to Category A, now meaning that you can only go through Category B, which is a more lengthy and time-consuming process, which means you have to apply to the government, you have to wait for a response, you have to provide medical evidence, and you have to have a doctor that's actually willing to prescribe it. So it's a little bit problematic, and patients are finding it very difficult to access products. And then the authorized prescriber scheme, which is I'm a doctor, I'm interested in prescribing, I must find the medical evidence, I must prove that I have an understanding of the market and how this product works, and then I can apply to a particular patient group. So there's still a lot of hurdles. One of the things that we're going to be doing in the next few weeks to somewhat combat, or I guess assist with the developing industry, is an initiative called the Medical Cannabis Council. So we started working last year on developing Australia's first national body to represent the entire medical cannabis industry, and in the next week or so we'll be launching this initiative as a national body and as a non-for-profit. And the goal is to unite the supply chain across all the way from research and medical personnel up to distribution of products, so that we can have a consistent theme of message that we can then work with the government as opposed to butt heads with the government. So a lot of advocates right now are very disappointed, fairly so, but they're not offering solutions as to how we can address problems. So what we want to do is create a body that will be able to work with the government in order to assist them with the, I guess, major issues, which are education, product, and in my view, the legislation from the state and territory perspective not aligning with one of the federal legislation. So if you go to South Australia, you'll have different cannabis legislation to if you're in New South Wales, and that's somewhat ineffective and not practical. So what we're going to be doing over the next year is working with the federal government to align state and territory legislation so that there is a consistent theme across the country. So I don't have that much time to talk. I'll mention that BuddingTech, as I said before, we're interested to work with people who are developing projects in the space, whether that's entrepreneurial focused or research focused, and providing as much assets and resources that they need to build these products to help develop the industry. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm here to answer any questions if you'd like.